Today's lecture, we're going to be speaking on fundraising and pitch decks, and we are joined by Haseeb Qureshi. He is a former professional poker player, but more importantly for today's meeting, he is the managing partner at Dragonfly. The way we'll have this set up, we'll do around 45 minutes of a conversation, and then we're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A. So before we do that, why don't you kick us off with a really brief background on your fund and the types of companies you invest in.
Yeah. So Dragonfly, we're a global crypto fund. We've been around since 2018, managed a few $billion in AUM. We invest mostly seed, Series A, but we can go up to Series B, Series C. So our checks are usually 2-3 million on the low side, up to 20, 25, 30 million on the high side. We invest all across the stack, layer ones, layer twos, DeFi, infra, stable coins, payments, interop, everything under the sun. If it's crypto, we're open to investing into it. And we're also known as being a pretty universal investor in that we invest both in Asia. We tend to be pretty dominant investors as well as in the US. So I'm based here in the US. We have an office in New York City as well as an office in Singapore. So that's Dragonfly at a high level.
Awesome. All right. So we sent you a list of questions. We're going to go through some of these. The first one is we're talking about the kind of current market conditions. So traditional crypto markets are all over the place, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen in the next few months. Would you say now is the right time to raise funds? And if so, what kind of advice do you have for raising in a bear market or an uncertain time like this?
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, my advice to founders is don't try to time the market. So naturally, there's always some thinking of like, oh, well, this looks bad or this looks good or hey, it's the time to do X, Y, or Z. But for the most part, the process of actually coming up with a startup idea and actually executing on building a startup happens on its own timeline. If you're able to raise more money, you're able to raise less money, that's going to influence the amount of resources you have and the ability for you to hire people and so on. But most of why startups fail or don't fail, it's actually very seldom because they're able to raise the right amount of money. Most of the time, it's just simply having the right idea and being able to build the momentum towards doing it. So if you are like, hey, I've got my thing, it's time to hit go, go raise money now. I would discourage you unless you actually really have a lot of flexibility around timing to think too deeply about timing. Like if you have 3 years of runway, then okay, maybe it's worth timing your actual fundraise for when the market is relatively loose. But if you're at your first round, which is my understanding is that it's the people in this accelerator, you're at your first round, you don't have the luxury of timing. And it's really fucking hard to know when timing is going to get better or worse, right? So Trump's trade war might continue for another 6 months. There might be, who knows, some kind of crazy shit going on with China that raises global tensions, that's going to spook markets even further. You just don't know. And because you don't know, don't try to time things. If you're a trader, then great, time the markets all you want. But you're an entrepreneur. You're trying to build something, which means that you should be raising capital in the timeline that makes sense for your business.
And so when it comes to raising capital, do you kind of see a list of certain milestones that you expect a project to have when they want to go raise, either a pre-seed, seed, or Series A? And then I guess also as a follow-up, are there any milestones that Dragonfly specifically looks at when they want to know if they're interested in funding a project?
So milestones is a broad concept, especially because it depends a lot on what you're building. So if you're building a payments product versus you're building some foundational crypto AI thing versus you're building a layer one, what we look for in terms of progress or signals of progress are very, very different. So it's hard to have a one size fits all recommendation about that. I'd say generally the biggest thing that you want is one, you want to really understand your business. So if you're building L1, you want to know exactly all the choices that you're making about building this L1, about how's your fee market going to work, what's your consensus algorithm, what's your go-to-market, what's your branding strategy. If you're building a payments product, then you want to understand, okay, what are my first set of customers? Who are my vendors that I'm going to be using? Like what's the kind of core flow of this product? So for all these things, it depends. If you're a pre-seed, most of the time you're pre-launch. Pre-seed generally means that your product's not live in the market yet and you're raising some money to get off the ground. If your seed depends on what kind of a seed it is, again, if you're building a layer one, a seed round for layer one, nothing's done yet. This is still very, very early in the development of a layer one that you'll raise a seed round. If you're building something that's like consumer facing, then probably your seed round, you already have a product. You already have something that's live. It might be shitty. It might be a really rough MVP, but you already have some validation that like, hey, this is something that people are resonating with or not. So depends on the product, depends on where it is and how R&D heavy it is, what the expectation is at seed. By Series A, okay, you have metrics. Almost certainly your underwriting metrics, unless you're doing something really, really R&D heavy. Series A is usually based on traction as opposed to based on storytelling.
Got it. And I feel some of the startups in this cohort, they've been trying to understand how to approach valuations. So specifically like the amount that they should raise and then how to deal with evaluations at the different stages. My question here is, should they kind of let the market decide, or should they kind of anchor at a specific valuation?
Answer is always let the market decide if you can. At the end of the day, valuation is not a grade. And this is the biggest thing that I think entrepreneurs tend to get stuck on is they're like, well, this guy got, 15 million and I only got 12 million, or this guy got 30, I got 40. So that means I'm better than him, or like this is not the right way to understand valuation. Valuation is not a grade. There's, not everyone doesn't stand in front of class and like compare their valuations and the best one wins. Valuation is a tool. It's a tool to get something that you need in order to make your business successful. And the thing that you need is money. So if your valuation allows you to raise more money with lower dilution, then great. That's a very useful tool for your business. But just getting a big valuation, if you don't actually exit, if you don't actually get acquired, or if you don't actually go public, or you don't actually launch your token, and are able to liquidate it into a strong market, then it doesn't matter what you raised money at. All that money was wasted at the end of the day if you don't end up getting an exit. So it's important to understand valuation is a tool. If you tie your valuation too closely to your ego, which is a very common thing that I see with founders, then it's like, oh, I have to get a better valuation than that guy. And so you end up choosing a very different capital structure, or a very different investor, or a very different time to go out. You say, oh, no, I don't want to raise right now because my valuation would be lower than this person or this number in my mind. Therefore, I'm going to wait longer. And then the market gets even worse in the future as you're waiting, or your traction's not getting any better, or you're running out the clock, or you end up having to let go of people because you weren't willing to take a down round. So at the end of the day, valuation is not what makes you win. It's what gives you the right to exist. So exist. That's step one to actually building a company, which means take a valuation if it's the best you can get in a tough market. Period. It's not a measure on you. It's not a measure of how good or bad of a founder you are, or how good of an idea you have. At the end of the day, the market is the market, and it's not entirely rational. Some entrepreneurs will just get really high valuations because an investor just really likes them or likes what they're doing. And you can look at that and say, oh man, that's really unfair. And yeah, it is unfair. The world's not fair. It is not created with the intention of giving you fairness. But you have to look at that complex of investors, markets, risk appetite that you see out there in the world, and make the best decisions you can for your company, which for the most part means you want to be tactical, you want to be smart on how you bring together a round, but you don't want to get too married to your valuation. So you saw this again, in 2021, 2022, many, many companies were able to raise at much higher valuations than they're able to raise in 24, 25. And that's caused a lot of companies to just sit on the sidelines and not be willing to understand that, hey, we're in a different world now. I might never get that valuation that I got in 2021. That doesn't mean that my business is done. That doesn't mean that I don't need to raise any more money. And so again, valuation is not a grade, is not a mark on you as a person, or on how valuable your company is fundamentally. It's just simply a tool that you need to use in order to get cash to go pay employees.
Okay, so I guess another thing that would be helpful to kind of talk about is at what point should the startups in general begin talking with investors? We have some startups here or are before traction, still in the MVP, some are, post that. So I guess my question is like, at what stage should they begin engaging with those investors? Should it be months before when they're ready to raise, or like maybe, for example, after them practicing with angel investors?
I would say it really depends on the founder. So if you're somebody that you're already pretty deeply connected into the investor world, or you already know investors, then great. Go socialize the concept with investors, let them know what you're doing, be on their radar, and that's going to likely grease the wheels if and when they're actually going to be underwriting you for an investment. If you don't know any investors, I'd say it's probably not a good use of your time to go around trying to cold DM investors just to have random catch-up talks when you don't actually have something to raise money for, right? Your time should overwhelmingly be spent building your fucking product. So as an entrepreneur, the main thing, the base case for how you should be spending your time is building your product. So if anything is not building your product, probably you should not be doing it right now. If that being said, when you are going to be going out to raise, yes, it's worth practicing and kind of laddering up. So start with angels, start with investors who are friendly and who you already have connections with, get them on board and use that to practice your pitch and kind of get deeper in the weeds with how you justify this and sell the story to investors. But at the end of the day, yes, the main thing is not investors. Investors are epiphenomenal to the main thing, which is if you build a great company, investors will show up to invest into it.
Okay, so I guess if you're in those later stages you're talking about, which is like you're going up the ladder, and you're finding other kinds of firms to talk to, how do you recommend projects think about which funds they should actually go out and target? And then on top of that, what kind of support or value outside of the actual capital should they be looking for, or should they reasonably expect from VCs?
So the VCs in crypto are actually pretty legible. There's a lot of places, I'm sure you guys probably have resources. I actually don't know of who are the major VCs in the sector. What do they tend to focus on? Who likes crypto AI? Who likes payments? Who likes stablecoins? So you should be filtering the set of VCs that you're trying to get in touch with. And of course, the main thing that you want to know is stage. Do these people write checks into pre-seed? Because if they don't write pre-seed, then my pre-seed round is I'm wasting their time going and talking to these people. So if you go talk to Pantera or something, Pantera doesn't write pre-seed checks. Like we don't write pre-seed checks. So if you're trying to raise $1 million from your lead, we're priced out. We're somebody that you talk to later on down the road. So that's the first thing that's just going to be a pure kind of time waste. Or for example, this is somebody that only does equity investments and I'm a token deal. Okay, wasting my time going and talking to this fund. Once you go past that, then you really are just looking for is this investor and or this VC firm aligned with this thesis? That's harder to evaluate because most crypto VCs are pretty generalist in that they're willing to do just about anything. But there are times when, for example, you got a fund like Coin Fund, which is very hardcore into crypto AI. And it's like, okay, if I'm building a crypto AI thing, I should probably go talk to Jake, Or if I'm in payments, like, okay, Han really loves payments. I should go talk to Han. So there are specializations or sort of majors and minors for different firms that are worth appreciating. But for the most part, stage is the main thing that you want to make sure you're filtering for, because otherwise you are actually just wasting your time. And then you asked about what types of support am I going to get from a VC beyond just capital? The answer again is it really depends. So different VCs have very different reputations for the kind of value that they're able to provide. Almost everybody is going to be able to just give you money and then do some kind of introductions to other investors. So that's kind of the table stakes, is that just socializing you with other pools of capital. The second thing you might look for that I think is pretty common is some BD support. So being able to introduce you to other companies that might be customers, partners, vendors, this kind of thing. Most VCs will be able to help with this. And then as you go deeper down the value chain of, okay, can this VC help me with recruiting? A lot of VCs can't. The big VCs like Dragonfly is well known for our help with recruiting. If you look at Andreessen, Paradigm, Pantera, these guys can help with recruiting. A lot of smaller VCs can't. They just don't have the bandwidth to be able to help portfolio companies recruit engineers. If you look at things like, can they help me with market making agreements or getting exchange listings or helping me with just sitting down and talking through strategy? A lot of VCs can't. A lot of if you go get marginal investment from some VC that just hung up their hat in the crypto world, they might not actually be very useful in thinking about, strategically how should I go after this market. So don't necessarily expect that. If you are going to raise capital, the main thing that you should expect from a VC is money. That's the most valuable thing they're going to give you. Even if it's a Dragonfly, the most valuable thing we give to our portfolio companies is the thing they actually needed, which is the money. Everything else we give them is gravy, and sometimes we can be really dramatically helpful. But for most companies, yeah, the main thing is that that's why they went to investors, because they needed money. Sometimes people do raise capital purely for strategic reasons, is that they need help with something or other that only they think we can provide them. But the most companies, that's not the story. The story is that they just need money.
Yeah, so I guess like when you first reach out to some of these investors, a lot of times you're sending a pitch deck, but I know you've been very vocal about favoring Notion over traditional pitch decks. Something I just want to talk about is I know there have been some worries about straying from familiar formats like a PDF or a DocSend. Do you think doing a Notion write-up is going to be a disadvantage with investors? And I guess like, do you think the benefits of Notion outweigh those concerns?
So I said this in the tweet thread that you're referring to, where I was kind of shitting on PowerPoints and pitch decks. To be clear, I think pitch decks are still the dominant way that you want to be conveying design-heavy products or consumer products, because these are very visual, right? You kind of want to see. I want to see the thing. I want you to walk me through each of the different mock-ups of the different pages, and like that's a place where visual storytelling is still the primary way that you're going to communicate that concept. But I think for the vast majority of deals, I think that a static write-up in a Notion doc or a Google doc or whatever is superior to a pitch deck. I think you can convey more useful information. You can cut a lot of the fluff and the, kind of hypey bullshit, which is what I think a lot of pitch, I read, I don't know, I've read thousands of pitch decks over my careers as a VC. Most of them, my eyes just glaze over because they're kind of saying the same thing. It's very repetitive. They're sort of hyping up a sector that I already understand is big. You don't need to explain to me that stablecoins are huge. You don't need to explain to me that payments volume is big. You don't need to tell me a big story about crypto AI. That's why I'm looking at your pitch deck, because I understand, okay, there might be something big at crypto AI. I get it. So the thing that I like about Notion is that they cut a lot of the bullshit and they go straight to, here's what I'm building, here's how it works, here's my team, here's how much I want to raise. And with a PowerPoint, there's just a lot more of just, I have to like decipher more of what you're saying in order to get the actual content. So that's the virtue. And of course, it also drives more towards metrics and something that's more identifiable signals of traction, or what you're really, what you've done so far as opposed to what you hope to do someday, which again, as an investor, I give less credit to that compared to what you've actually done. So that's why I like Notions. I'd say also it's an increasingly common trend that I see more and more startups are just doing a Notion or a Google Doc as opposed to doing a pitch deck. And it tends to be the more forward-facing startups that are more on the cutting edge that tend to do that. So I'd say it's a good signal generally when a startup is doing it. That being said, that doesn't mean that you can't have a pitch deck. It does mean that I think the primary form of collateral you should be sending people is not the pitch deck. If you want to use a pitch deck when you're pitching, it's kind of what the pitch deck is for. I think people also don't really understand that the way you design a pitch deck, most pitch decks are read, that you're not pitching over it. And so, if I get a pitch deck and like, I'm like, what does this mean? I don't really, it doesn't really make sense. Like, the pitch deck should primarily be understood to be, this is passive marketing collateral. If you're sending it to an investor, you should make sure the pitch deck makes sense without your voiceover. Otherwise, I'm just going to look at this and be like, what am I even looking at? I don't understand what you're saying. So most of the time, I think the best way to pitch something is send over a Notion that describes clearly what you're doing, what you're building, why it's important. Here's my team is. Here's how much I want to raise. And then if I find it interesting, we get on a call, we talk, and like you're not presenting a PowerPoint. The best version of this is we're talking, it's a conversation, we're asking questions, it's like dynamic. To me, that's the best form of pitching. I think for many people that sounds terrifying, and maybe having a static format for a PowerPoint makes you feel more comfortable, more confident. I would say you should just go practice on ChatGPT and get the fuck over it. because if you can't sell your product, if you can't sell your startup, you're not going to be successful as a founder. So get used to being able to be more dynamic in how you sell something. Again, increasingly, the best pitches that I get and the ones I'm most likely to invest into, they're not structured like a, linear step by step. Okay, here's all the slides of a pitch.
Yeah, so obviously you said you've seen thousands of pitch decks, and pitches in general. I guess like what's the one thing founders are consistently underestimating when they do meet with investors? And how does it kind of impact their chances when they do those pitches?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I'm looking for from a founder is mastery. I want to know that you understand this thing in and out. You've thought it through deeper than anybody else has, and you have something, some insight, some depth that nobody else has, and you've earned from your understanding of this domain. If I can see that in you, that's going to make me much more excited, regardless of what your product is. If instead you're like clicking through and giving me a canned pitch, I haven't learned anything. ChatGPT can give me a pitch for your startup, right? If you just do this exercise of take your startup pitch, like take your pitch deck, feed it to ChatGPT, and go put it on voice mode and have it pitch your startup. If it sounds basically like the way you pitch your startup, then that shows you that, okay, you're not impressing an investor by showing me that you can pitch your startup like a ChatGPT bot can, right? That's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is that you know something nobody else knows. Almost by definition, that means that your knowledge is not in the training data. ChatGPT cannot replicate what you can do, right? If I go grill ChatGPT on like, okay, tell me about this market, tell me about this product, tell me about, okay, if you're doing it this way, why not do it this way? Okay, if this is your token model, why wouldn't it get this issue if this thing happened, right? And I'm pushing against your understanding and your depth of knowledge. If I see that it hits a wall and, oh, you haven't really thought this thing through, you don't really have mastery of this thing, or you haven't really spent that much time with these customers, or you haven't really gone as deep in the market and understanding all of your competitors and who built what and why is this thing not working, why is this thing going to work? If I see that you haven't really fully traversed the idea maze and mapped out every nook and cranny of it, then that's what's going to make me think like, okay, this person doesn't have that much depth in this particular problem. Um, so that's the main thing that I'm really going to be looking for. Now, obviously, I'm looking for a lot of other things like, okay, how strong is your team? How interesting is this product? Blah, blah. Obviously, I'm looking for those things. But in the actual pitch itself, what I'm really looking for is to understand you and how much you are bringing to the table that's not present in the pitch deck.
Yeah, I actually love the ChatGPT idea. I've never heard of that before. That's actually really cool. Okay, so another question I have is there a single fundraising pitch that you still think about to this day that really impressed you?
No, I don't think about pitch. I don't think about pitches. But is there a pitch that really impressed me? Let me think. What is a pitch that really impressed me? Um, I would say, I mean, just clocking off of pitches that I've gotten recently, I'd say probably Double Zero is the pitch I've gotten recently that impressed me the most. I don't think this is a great example because I think Double Zero is kind of uh, a very ambitious and also very well-formed tech vision. So this is probably very disanalogous to most people's pre-seed startups. Let me see if I can think of an example that's more closer to something that's pre-seed. Um, Maybe one of the examples I can give is, so when I did so I did the seed round of Near Protocol, which is one of these Altel ones, and this was a long time ago. This is back in 2018, I believe. And when I did the seed of Near Protocol, it was these guys who had come out of, one of them was out of MemSQL, the other guy was out of Google. They were database engineers and distributed systems guys, a lot of experience in building stuff. And they pitched us on this idea of this blockchain that was going to be optimized for running on mobile phones. That was the original pitch. And I sat down with them and they were convinced that Ethereum was so broken and that Ethereum really needed to scale. And these Ethereum guys were so dumb and they couldn't, they didn't really understand how to build large scale distributed systems. And they thought it was going to be really easy. And so they had this design for this blockchain. And basically, I tore apart their blockchain. They kind of sketched out on like a piece of paper, and I was like, no, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. This is not going to work. Way too much bandwidth running through this thing. You're not going to be able to get consensus here. And I basically told them, look, your system is totally broken. Like, GG, go home and try again. And I walked away from that meeting being like, yeah, these guys are way overconfident. The next day, they reached out to me again, and they had sketched out. They sent me an email in which they sketched out a completely new design for the blockchain that was responsive to all the critiques that I'd made of their previous design. And that was actually the reason why I ended up investing into Near Protocol. Was that I still thought their design was kind of bogus, and like I still didn't think a mobile phone optimized L1 was going to make sense. But I really was blown away by the fact that they were so responsive and they were so quick to adapt to the feedback and the pushback that I gave them. That I was like, okay, I think these guys are actually really fucking smart. And I think they're going to build something big. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be this, but I think they're going to build something really important. That was one of the pitches that really stuck with me because, again, it's like the thing that I'm looking for is the aliveness of the founder, of the idea, of the, something that's alive, responds, it adapts, it mutates around the stressors that it's receiving. That's what I want to see from a founder, because actually building a startup is hard. Stuff's going to come up. You're going to realize that you're wrong about half the things that you chose, and you're going to have to adapt them. Nothing that I've ever invested into, if it actually goes and hits product market fit, looks the same as it was when I invested. Everything evolves. And so your ability to evolve and adapt to different ideas and stressors is the core life force of what makes startups successful. So that's what I want to see.
So I guess kind of on the same vein of like responses, I think something that could be helpful is understanding how to approach follow-ups. So after you've had a pitch or a presentation with someone, what do you think is like the most effective way for founders to continue to be engaged with that and after the initial meeting, but without sounding like pushy or desperate or like keep spamming?
Yeah, I would say, look, if somebody is interested in what you're doing, they're going to be responsive. If they're not interested in what you're doing, they're not going to be responsive. And I think you should try, like, don't try to be Hollywood about it and be like, oh, if I ask them how things are going, they're going to think that I'm desperate. Like that's not the understanding, right? You're a business person, they're a business person. If somebody communicated to you a timeline, first of all, make sure that when you're in the pitch meeting, you ask them about timeline and like, hey, when should I be expecting some feedback, and how long does your process generally take? When somebody tells you that, you should be setting the dates at the moment that you get off the call of when I'm going to check back in. And maybe it's like, halfway to their IC, and then, on the date of their IC, you check back in. And again, if you're getting radio silence, you should assume that's because they're not interested. And you chasing them is not going to make them interested. It's possible that they drop the ball, but most of the time when an investor is really interested in a company, if they're not responding, it's not because they're dropping the ball. It's usually because they're not interested. So it's a numbers game. Overwhelmingly, there's going to be some VCs who think what you're doing is stupid. There's going to be some VCs who think what you're doing is okay. And there's going to be some VCs who think what you're doing is awesome. And almost always that is the case, is that startups are polarizing by nature. There's never been a deal. I've never seen a deal that every single investor wanted to do it. And I've very seldom seen deals that literally no investor anywhere wanted to do it. There's almost always somebody who thinks that what you're doing is an interesting idea and they want to give you money to give it a try. So the answer is that go far and wide, don't get too fixated on individual investors, and understand that it's a process. And the more procedural you are, the more successful you're going to be in your fundraise.
Got it. Got it. I guess from your own experience, are there any frequent mistakes that founders make when they actually do begin to initiate that fundraising process?
Probably the biggest thing I would say, so one, not having their shit together. So like make sure that you're ready to go if you're actually getting on pitches with people. I think make sure that you're driving toward a real conclusion, which is we want to raise X amount of money by Y date. You don't necessarily have to communicate Y date in advance, but you do have to start making a timeline of, yeah, we're going to choose a lead on X date. And X date might be, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, whatever it is, depending on what's appropriate for your fundraising timeline. But you want to be creating some kind of timeline and some kind of momentum toward actually getting shit closed. And again, you also want to make sure that you're hitting a lot of people in the same timeline, right? What you really, really don't want to do is you go out, you pitch 3 investors, and you're like, hey, any of you guys want to lead? And they're like, no, none of us want to lead. And then you're like, okay, now I go out and find the next tranche of 3 people, but those people already heard it from those other people that we were raising, and they said no. And so now all of a sudden, like, we're losing momentum, and fewer people are interested in it. And now it looks like we're sort of a stale fruit that nobody wants to pick up at the grocery store. That is kind of the worst position you can put yourself in as a founder, because investors talk, they share ideas, they communicate with each other. So you do really want to time things to be in a relatively tight window where you talk to everybody and the auction is happening simultaneously. There's not subsequent auctions where, okay, we tried this tranche, didn't work. Okay, we tried another tranche, didn't work. Okay, we tried another tranche. Maybe this one will work. Don't do that. That's a formula for failure.
Got it. Okay, so one other question I have is about hiring. So some of the teams here, they are in the process of getting their first new hires, and I'm curious about what you think are like the most important qualities or maybe even roles that someone should prioritize when they do begin looking for those first hires.
It's very difficult to give general advice because it depends on what your company is and why you want to hire someone. So the first thing I'd say as you were thinking about hiring is first really fucking understand, why do you want to hire someone? What do you actually want them to do? What is the work that you need done? Reflexively hiring because you think that's what a startup is supposed to do is a very, very big mistake, because it means you don't understand what you want, and that means you're going to get exactly that, which is not what you want. Second is to create a process. Startups tend to be kind of loosey-goosey, and they're sort of like, oh, I just want somebody who's like a great executor, or you're just kind of hiring on vibes, or you're just hiring your buddies. Again, I think this is a very big mistake for a startup. If your first hire needs to do X, like I need help with X, X might be engineering, it might be go to market, it might be something else. Then okay, understand what's that thing that I want. Go talk to people if you don't understand that very well. Like, let's say, look, I'm not a dev. I don't really understand how to hire for a dev. Go talk to devs, or go talk to people who have hired devs and understand, what should I be looking for. Maybe even enlist somebody from another startup or somebody else who can help you to interview the person to make sure that you're not facing adverse selection in, okay, I'm going to end up picking some random guy who sucks at development because I don't understand developers. And then third, sketch out an actual process. Doesn't matter if it's your first hire or second hire. Make an actual process, and that process should be tied to the skills that you're actually hiring for. So if you're hiring for, hey, I need help with BD, create a BD hiring process. It might be janky. You might not really know what should I be asking? I don't know. Ask ChatGPT. Again, ChatGPT knows all. It has seen 1,000 startups that can help you with it. So that will be way better than just kind of vibing it out and taking a guess at what you think you should be looking for with a BD hire or a legal hire or whatever. So those are the main things. Lastly, as a founder, hiring is probably going to be 50% of your time. It's a huge part of what your role is as a founder. Now, of course, there's only true once you have money and actually can hire people. But all of the hiring at a startup should be founder driven. So you are doing the hiring, and you are manually going out and finding the people who you need to hire, pitching them, and selling them on your company. Half of what a founder does is just sell. And sometimes selling to investors, sometimes selling to founders, sometimes selling to partners, sometimes selling to your own team. But that's part and parcel of what you should be doing as a founder. And you should definitely be doing it very actively when it comes to bringing people into the company.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna pass it along to Ashley. I know she has a few questions.
Cool.
Yeah. Hi, Haseeb. So I
Hey.
guess when I think of founders, like that's kind of across the board. Some founders are very technically minded. However, they might not have the chops when it comes to being the CEO or effectively or scaling a company. So what advice would you give to teams in the early stages when it comes to being introspective about what their strengths and weaknesses are?
So first and foremost, I would say if you're founding a startup, and you feel like, well, I don't really know that I'm CEO material, get over it. Like, you decide to start a startup. That means that you have no choice. You have to become CEO material, period. So figure out what are your weaknesses, ask the people around you, start working on them. There's a great book that I recommend called The CEO Within, by this guy, Matt Machari. He's like an executive coach, works with a lot of the biggest founders in the industry. He actually, I believe he worked with Brian Armstrong, as well as like CEO of Reddit and a bunch of other companies. This is a very, very old story in Silicon Valley of, technical, nerdy founder eventually becomes CEO of a, multi-billion-dollar business. They all figured it out. That means that you can figure it out too. The determination to become a founder means the determination to do what it takes to succeed. And for a company to succeed, it may not need, you're maybe never going to be like, the MBA suit wearing business leader striking up deals. That's fine. You don't have to be that to be the CEO, but you do have to be a great leader. That is a non-negotiable to become a startup, is for you to become a leader. So
Right.
if you don't feel like you're a leader yet, then you go do the work, go into a cave, meditate under a waterfall, figure out how you need to become that leader.
Right. Have you had candid conversations with teams about this? Maybe some, like, you don't have to share like names or anything, but just your portcos when you're advising them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does sometimes happen that the person who originally founds the company is not the eventual leader, but every startup needs a leader, because a startup is, what makes startups so powerful is that a startup is like a little battalion that's out on its own. You know, um, a big company is a bureaucracy. It doesn't have the same kind of spiritual energy behind a single person. Even though, yes, there's a CEO to a big company, people kind of look at the CEO and they're like, oh, okay, it's kind of like the president or something. People turn on the TV and they see him speaking and they're like, okay, sure, fine. Whereas for a founder and a startup, it's like a team of Navy SEALs, and there's one person who's sitting at the front, and he or she is the general that's in there with the infantry, leading them to what for most startups is near certain death. Most startups fail, but people are willing to do it anyway. They're willing to give it a try because they believe that it might work, because I believe in not just this person, but this team. That kind of moral authority is the magic of why startups can outcompete big companies. It's why they can do things they can. It's why they can work harder than them. It's why they can grind more, more, they can endure more pain than big companies can. That is why startups get to succeed sometimes. So that comes from you inspiring the people around you, from them believing in you and believing in your leadership. Sometimes you're fucking it up. Sometimes you're being too meek. Sometimes you're not really taking the moral authority that you have and exercising it for the benefit of the company. And a good investor will notice that and will tell you the truth about how you're behaving as a leader. But the best way that you can get there is to just ask the people around you. They know, right? When you see a weak leader, everybody sees it. It's not a mystery. It's right there in plain sight. The only difference is that most people are too afraid to actually just tell you the truth. Every single person who's a bad leader, everybody around them sees it. It's almost never the case that bad leaders, some people think they're good and some people think they're bad. Very, very rarely is that the case. Almost always, everybody knows exactly what your weaknesses are, and they just don't want to tell you. And they don't want to tell you because
Right.
you are not creating the space for them to tell you, because they're worried that they're going to hurt your feelings, or that they're going to degrade you, or that they're going to harm their relationship with you. And it's on you to make clear to them that they will not do that if they give you the real, genuine feedback of how you're behaving as a leader. But that's on you. It's not on
That's a
them.
great point. It's a great point. I think Kim Scott's Radical Candor is another good book that talks about ruinous empathy versus the benefits of being radically candid with somebody. So that's a great takeaway. Thank you. I want to know, so we just, before we hand it over to some other people for questions, you talked about the pitch, most memorable pitch recently. What is that one investment that got away that you look back on and you said, oh, damn, I really wish I participated in Series A or pre-seed or whatever, whatever investment round?
Yeah, I wrote a viral tweet a while back about passing on the Solana seed round.
Okay.
which was the 4-cent round. But that's actually not the most painful pass for me. The most painful pass for me, in monetary terms, that was certainly the most painful, but the most painful pass for me was the Uniswap Series A.
Right.
That was the deal that I was the closest to doing. You know, I wasn't particularly close to doing the Solana seed round, but the Uniswap Series A, it was a sector that I thought about a lot, about DeFi and DeFi market infrastructure. I knew Hayden, I liked him. He really looked up to us, not looked up to us, but really admired the work that we'd done at Dragonfly in DeFi. We analyzed the business really closely. We understood it super well. We were early investors in a lot of stuff in DeFi. You know, we did Compound, we did 1inch, you know, the seed round of UMAs. We did a lot of stuff in that early generation, but we just didn't get it on Uniswap. We were thinking too narrowly that, well, you know, right now these pools are incentivized. It's kind of inorganic volume because they're sort of paying people that, you know, paying people to trade is what you know, what later became known as liquidity mining. And we didn't understand that, you know, liquidity mining is the point. That's the feature. It's not this distortion of what's happening in Uniswap. That's the magic of Uniswap, is that liquidity mining is so simple to do. And so all this stuff, it's kind of like we understood all of the actual numbers, but we got the story totally backwards. And that was to me, that was the most painful miss in my career as an investor, was the Uniswap Series A.
Was that because of the pitch, or it was just anything, you know, circumstantial, lots of things happening at that time, you just didn't understand it, lack of
To
knowledge?
me, it was more of the curse of knowledge, is that in a way we kind of knew too much, right? So we had this very, very intense due diligence process that we ran on Uniswap, where we had, you know, the LP earnings for all the biggest pools that we saw. You know, these pools, these LPs weren't making money. We thought, okay, Uniswap is too easily forkable. It's not going to be resistant to forks. We thought that, yeah, you know, the biggest pools are incentivized, and most of these things are on mean reverting pairs, like, you know, it was like USD pegs. And the problem with this analysis that we did was that on all of these things, we were right. Uniswap did get forked. The biggest pools were USD to USD pairs. You know, there were going to be a lot of incentivized inorganic volume on Uniswap, but none of that mattered. We were right about every element of the analysis, but none of it mattered because we missed the bigger picture. And that, I think, is part of the myopia that you can have sometimes as an investor, is fixating too much on the details and not allowing your imagination to tell you this bigger story, which is that, yeah, this thing is going to change the way that people think about trading. And we never asked ourselves that question, which was the most important question when actually looking at a startup.
That's actually really interesting, because one company that comes to mind in regards to selling a vision, right? What the future will look like is EigenLayer. Like AVS has never existed. They basically sold an entirely new concept, like restaking. You know, staking was already people could earn passive income on their own, but to power new applications. So when you look at, you know, future investments, like how much do you weigh a brand new idea or concept, or something that's sounds very powerful, versus something that might have clear product market fit already?
So there's very different kinds of pitches for products that are really ex nihilo versus products that are an iteration or improvement on something that already exists. If you look at some of our best investments from the last vintage, right? So, you know, we invested into the seed round of Monad. Monad was building a new EVM layer 1. In a way, that's not really a new pitch. That's not really, I mean, you can think of it, oh, they have all these innovations or whatever. But fundamentally, the pitch is that, oh, we're me too. We're also going to build an EVM L1. That was a fantastic pitch, but it was not a 0 to 1 type pitch, right? Another pitch that we got was the seed round of Athena. Now, you might think of Athena as being, well, it's kind of 0 to 1, but actually we backed another project called Lemma Finance in 2021, which was a predecessor to Athena. And it actually was the exact same model. It was using DeFi instead of using CeFi to get the exchange, to get the higher float on perps. And but it was the same thing. It was a long short stable coin that was, or, you know, synthetic dollar that paid you the funding rate. So it was the same idea. Actually, it was an old idea. And they knew about Lemma Finance. They knew that we had invested in Lemma Finance, which is why they came to us and wanted us to underwrite Athena. They knew that we'd understand the idea. But that was actually not a 0 to 1 pitch. 0 to 1 pitches are very rare. Most of the time, there's some prior art before you've come into the space. Now, first of all, if you don't know that prior art, that is going to be a big pockmark against you, because your ability, again, to understand and really master this domain requires you to know who went into this maze before I did, where did they traverse in this maze, and what did they learn about what are the dead ends. And maybe the answer is that, well, they were just too early. What they just got the timing wrong, and now if I do the exact same thing, it's going to turn out better. Sometimes that's the answer. If you look at Compound versus Aave, that was actually just the answer, is that Aave came later, but it was just the right timing. And the timing of the product just worked at that point when before it didn't. Same thing with perp dexes, right? Like Hyperliquid and DYDX, fundamentally the same product, but Hyperliquid came much later, and it was the right time for Hyperliquid to get created. So a lot of these things, it's not that binary. Sometimes it's really more of a continuum of going 0 to 1. Now, if you look at something like 00, which we recently invested into, 00 really is 0 to 1. I've never seen anybody pitch anything like 00 in my life. And those kind of pitches, Eigenlayer is another one of them, where it's genuinely 0 to 1. Nobody else, I've never heard anyone describe this idea before. Those kinds of deals are, really different. They're really unique. But the vast majority of founders, even the vast majority of successful founders, doesn't look like that. Coinbase was not the first wallet or the first exchange. DYDX was not the first perp dex. All these things have predecessors. Uniswap was not the first AMM. Bancor was actually the first AMM. And I remember investing into Bancor. It was one of the biggest ICOs in 2017. So you don't need to be first. Being first is actually not that important. What is important is that you understand the space better than all your competitors do, and you have an angle of attack that they didn't. That's what's important, and that's what investors want to see.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I'm going to open it up to questions from our accelerator cohort.
Hey, Haseeb. Thank you for your sharing. I really like your points. It's very insightful. And I do have a question about since we are all on a very early stage and the market is kind of bearish, and we are preparing something allow us to burst in a better market. So for right now, we are building and keep doing fundraising. So do you have any suggestions about the timing on how to prepare the roadmap, depending whether it's influenced by the market or the the large environment?
So I'd reiterate my point earlier, is that if you're pre-seed and you need to raise money, go raise money. There are some things that it's really not in your control, and it's very hard to forecast. When exactly is the market going to get better? I mean, at this point, it's not even crypto, right? It's just geopolitics. That's what's affecting the global markets. So if you have a strong opinion about when Trump is going to chill out a little bit and we're going to end this trade wars, then okay, maybe you could use that to inform your view of when you want to go out and raise. But it might be a year, it might be 2 years. We don't know. And if that's true, it's like, do you really want to be sitting around waiting for 2 years to decide when to raise money? Most startups can't. Most startups, it is kind of a do or die of like, hey, I need to raise money, and if I don't, then GG. So I'd say, if I'm assuming that you're pre-seed, if you are pre-seed, I would say just go raise money. It's not the case that pre-seed funds are frozen, that they're not allocating capital. They're still investing. The one advantage of VCs is that VC capital, they're somewhat cyclical, but it's not nearly as cyclical as the market itself, because almost all these people, they have locked up capital. They have funds that are allocated over the period of years that they raised, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, that they're allocating now. And so that money is there. It's not like it doesn't exist. It's different if you look at liquid markets or public markets. Public markets are very sensitive to what's going on in the broader world, but VC markets are somewhat smoothed relative to what you see in public markets. So I wouldn't be that inclined to really dramatically change my plans based on, hey, markets are down over the last 3 months.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, Haseeb. I have a question. Thank you so much for your insight. I find it very helpful and illuminating and inspiring. So our question is like, so we sort of did the thing that you recommend not to do, like talk to investor in a trench and talk to more, so it can go better. So I wonder, like, once you're already in that kind of like a momentum, or like, how do you kind of fix it and like turn things around, like just like restructure the process and structure?
What do you mean restructure the process? You
Uh,
mean you
I-
started by tranching instead of talking to everybody?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I
Like,
see.
yeah,
I see. I would just fix it now. So just say like, look, okay, we got to go hit everybody. There's not that many VCs in crypto. There's probably like, I don't know, 50, 60 at the most. You can bang out all those emails in a day. Or if if it's not emails, intros, finding some way to do it. But basically just drop everything. And like, this is existential for a startup is, can you actually raise money? So drop everything and go figure out how am I going to get in front of all of these 50 investors in the span of the next 2 weeks? And if you can't do that, then you're not trying hard enough.
got it. Thank you. Another question I have is like, I feel when I've talked to investors, it almost feel like there's like a near-term milestone. When I hit, it will be stronger pitch, and also like to pitch investor, it's also sort of like we need to kind of almost slow down over like a product building for a couple of weeks. So there seems
Yeah.
like a conflict between them. So I wonder what's the right way to think about it. So should we just like pretty much like slow down the product development for a couple of weeks, just focus on fundraising, and then come back, like just take whatever we have right now, polish it to the best.
Yeah.
That's the right approach, right? Like not doing both at the same time.
So there's no general answer to this question, right? What you're describing is a deep fundamental trade-off. And the answer for every startup is going to be different. Your job as a CEO is to go try to figure out what is the right trade-off, which is, are we far along enough right now that I can raise money? And the way you're going to get that is by just going and talking to investors and just checking the vibe. If the vibe is bad and they're just like, yeah, we don't think you're far along enough yet, this is not really interesting to us right now, then go back to building and calibrate. If you start talking to investors and you feel like, hey, there's something here, I think there's going to be some interest, then maybe it's time to like, okay, let's slow down on the product side and focus on fundraising. But it's sort of like it's a little bit of a learning algorithm, right? It's like exploitation versus exploration. It's on you to calibrate, get the signals that you can to decide how to allocate resources within your startup.
Got it. Thank you very much.
I really resonate with this question. So does that mean like as you mentioned before, you like kind of need to talk to investors in the short period so they have like sort of similar information to make the decision. Does that mean like you once you decide to go to the fundraising and you just fully focused on fundraising and like talk to different investors in a very short time frame? And then like if you're not feeling the vibe, you just go back to the building mode.
Yes, that is exactly what I'd advocate. So if you realize that you're pushing on a closed door, then don't waste any more time, right? If you have the ability to keep going and to keep building and put yourself in a better position later on down the road, go do that.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But all this is subject to your constraints, right? So as a founder or as an early team, at a certain point, you will run out of money. And so you got to know for yourself what that timeline is and how long am I willing to go? Sketch it out in advance of like, hey, if I run this low on savings, then it's time to call it. And that again should be part of your game plan. And it should be part of this kind of, again, dynamic algorithm in your head of how much resources am I going to dedicate to fundraising right now, given that if I am grinding on the product longer, I'm more likely to have a successful fundraise. There's no one size fits all. I can't really give you advice without knowing where you're at as a startup and what investors are saying, but that's the thing that you should be optimizing for. Don't lie to yourself. Don't delude yourself. Don't live in this world where you're not seeing clearly that yes, there's a point at which I will stop. Of course there is. That's why you need to raise money. So if you don't clearly tell yourself, I have 6 months to go, and if I don't raise money within 6 months, it's game over. I gotta go, pay rent and like take care of my family, or whatever that number is for you, right? But like that number should be on a fucking whiteboard in front of you all day long, so that you can clearly see, here's where I'm at. And as I'm getting closer and closer to this date, the time I should be spending on fundraising goes to 100%.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate this talk and definitely a lot of insights. So one question I have, which I think can be more of a hotly debated one, is, launching bootstrapped and then trying to go fundraise versus fundraising before you go live, even if you can. So the difference in the pitch is, before you're live, all numbers are kind of predictions of, okay, here's what we think the market is. But once you're live, everything is real. All the numbers are real. And it, I think, changes the conversation with investors, because then they can actually look at the number and see what's real and what's not. So what's your advice on that, of pushing past, straight to real numbers, that we're being honest about what this is, or before that of, here's what we think the market may be, and everyone's being hypothetical?
It's almost always easier to raise money before you launch than after you launch. Now, why is that true? It's true because startups are power law distributed. Power law distributed means that a small number of startups are extremely successful, some startups are moderately successful, and most startups don't succeed at all. And if you're part of a power law distribution, that means actually the median startup is a bad investment. The average startup is a good investment. Now, how can that be true? It's true because that's what a power law means. Power law means the average is higher than the median. The median is actually in the crappy part of the distribution. So what that means is that your expected value raising from a VC is higher before you launch than the median expected value after you launch. Which means that you're much more able to raise money, because right now it's kind of like the box is closed. We don't know what's inside. There's some chance that, like, okay, I'm going to build this consumer product. It's going to become the next viral thing. It's going to be the next pumped out fund. Everyone's going to be playing it, trading it, whatever. There's some probability of that. Let's say it's 10%. An investor is willing to take those odds, because an investor has a big portfolio of a lot of different investments, right? And so they're okay having 10 players, each of which has a 10% chance of becoming the next pumped out fund. But if you are a startup and like post your launch, there's only a 10% chance that you're pumped out fund. And 90% of the time you're not pumped out fund. And that means that after that, you're not gonna be able to raise any money. So when the box is closed, the option value of your startup is much higher, which is why it's a very good idea to try to raise pre-launch as opposed to waiting post-launch, unless you're very confident you're gonna get traction. Now, there are certain things that are not power law distributed. Like there are certain businesses that, and that's part of the reason why they don't tend to be venture businesses, right? Like restaurants are not power law distributed. You can totally go get financing for a restaurant before you launch a restaurant. People understand how restaurants work. They don't, it's not that a few restaurants make all the money and everyone else goes to zero. But startups are not shaped like that, which is why startup financing is so different from financing in other industries.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think we're at time now. Thank you so much for joining us, Haseeb, and really appreciate this.
My pleasure.